which, always that countdown always makes every one of these podcasts start with us laughing.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Everyone starts with a
Yes.
laugh,
I
right?
think, a laugh a day is
So,
important. So I was actually thinking about that earlier. I'm
yeah,
like, I wonder
yeah.
what will make me laugh today. Now I know. It's a countdown.
Aw.
Good.
That's great. Well, Kristen, thank you for agreeing to sit down and talk with me and the listeners today about your work and really how, we're talking about the five images of the diaconate. And for you, you feel as if the image of doorkeeper really reflects the work that you're doing now in your nonprofit that you created. Can you tell us a little bit about that nonprofit and how you see it reflected in the image of
For
doorkeeper?
sure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here
You're
and part of
welcome.
this conversation. So, Annie and Millie's
Mhm.
Place is the nonprofit that I founded 3.5 years ago in January of 2021. And I founded it
Mhm.
in memory of my sister Annie and her dog Millie, who together were experiencing homelessness and were unable to access emergency overnight shelter because those shelters could not
Mhm.
accommodate the dog. And so Annie had a choice of either surrendering her animal to receive safe and secure shelter or staying alongside her dog, which is what she chose to do. And that meant that she had to sleep outside and find little hidden protected places. It meant her and Millie kept each other warm. And it also meant that Annie didn't have the access to all the other services that she would have needed along the way, because at
Mhm.
that first time she came and knocked on the door and was told no, she walked away and
Mhm.
not knowing,
Yeah.
how to navigate anything else. So the doorkeeper really fits Annie and
Mhm.
Millie's story because she knocked on a door and was turned away. So our work at Annie
Yeah.
and Millie's Place is really to open that door of welcome on homeless shelters, emergency overnight shelters for humans, to open the door to people who have an animal companion. And not all animal
Mhm.
companions can be qualified as ADA service animals, and therefore, even ESAs and just pet companions are not allowed to come in. So, our work as advocacy and in between is to literally open the door to a shelter to allow these people to come in. And actually, that's on our logo. The logo encompasses the whole Annie and Millie story, but the mission is really right here in the
Mhm.
wagging tail on the roof that welcomes people as they come. So that is why
Oh,
Doorkeeper fits in the work that we're doing to bridge the gap for homeless services and animal welfare agencies, for the person and their animal together to be welcomed into the spaces.
yeah. Yeah. So, one thing you mentioned was that, assistant companions are now, and this was within the last
Mm-hmm.
3 years,
Mm-hmm.
you would say that they're now allowing medical assistant
So,
dog pets
yeah.
into these
Well,
places.
that's
Hmm.
service animals. That's ADA compliance, but
Service animal.
in order for an animal to be a
Okay.
service animal, they need to provide a medical service, either,
Hmm. Hmm.
identifying an oncoming seizure or an allergy in the room or something like that. And that's a very specially trained animal and a high cost
Hmm.
to be able to get that animal. So, um, emotional
Hmm.
support animals, ESAs, are a lot easier to get, but the ADA laws do not
Hmm.
require spaces to allow ESAs to walk alongside
Yeah.
or to come into spaces.
Would you like to talk about how, even though Millie wasn't trained and specialized, she was very special and very much necessary,
Yes.
right, for your
Yes. And I
sister?
will talk,
Hmm.
just a trigger warning for those. This story does involve uh, death by suicide. So I just want to put that out there for any listeners who need to be warned that that's coming. Annie and Millie were experiencing
Yeah.
homelessness for 7 months, living on the street, just trying to figure out how to stay warm and stay fed along the way. And for Annie to be able to keep Millie alongside her meant that she had a companion. She had a purpose because she needed to take care of Millie. She had companionship. She had a purpose. She had love. Our family walked a really fine line while Annie was journeying through her homeless experience between enabling and empowering. And we did this for 7 months. And every time that Annie would reach out, there were some times that we had to say no and that we couldn't provide what she was asking for. And it was tricky. We were guessing every single time. Like, was this the right choice? Was this not the right choice? How do we walk this? And after 7 months, Annie was finding a home that she was squatting in, her and Millie together. And it was there that Annie died by suicide. And Millie was the one who was at that scene when the police showed up and the person who found her was there. It was Millie who was there instead of our family. And that's when things got really clear for me. And I flipped the script on what was Millie doing. Millie was saying yes every time, even when our family had to say no. And so Millie provided the constant, unconditional, yes, I'm going to go with you into this space. Yes, I'm going to be with you alongside. Yes, I'm going to keep you warm. And yes, I'm going to give you a purpose because I need you to feed me. And so she said yes
Yeah.
every time. So she really provided a constant in Annie's life when Annie had no other consistency, even from us, from her
Yeah.
family. And there's many reasons for that. So she just always said yes. And so I think that those
Yeah.
animals that walk alongside those people, they are their primary purpose, their primary source of love and companionship, and sometimes even protection. Those animals provide a
Yeah.
protective
That's what I was thinking.
set of eyes, set of ears. They're
Hmm.
always aware of what's happening around them.
Yeah.
So there's more
Hmm.
to what they do than just be cute.
Yeah.
So
And 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 whether or not they're wearing a
yes,
vest, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
Hmm. Do you find that cats provide the same
cats,
thing? I think when we spoke, I told you that my daughter, she attends a urban campus, so it's right downtown Atlanta, and she befriended a woman who was
mhm,
experiencing homelessness, who now has
good.
shelter. Um, and but she had these cats with her, and my daughter says she kept the cats in the stroller and she pushed them around. So, and they're in the housing with her too,
Oh,
which I was really excited to hear that there was an apartment, that would allow her pets to come to.
yeah, cats
So,
are a
what?
big part. Yeah, like
Yeah.
probably about like
Mm-hmm.
15, 20% of our clients are cats. Cats live well in cars for people who are living in a car kind of thing.
Oh, that's
They
right.
also, I've
Yeah.
got one client who his cat, Black Dynamite is her name, and he wants her to be famous someday. So I feel like I can say her name online. So Black, yeah, Black
That's right.
Dynamite is in his backpack, and his backpack has sort of this globe shape that sticks out. And so she just sits in her little globe window and looks outside all day long, and it's filtered and she could get fresh air and all that. But
Yeah.
like the cat backpacks
Uh-huh.
are a thing. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting to see. I've even seen a ferret.
Mm-hmm.
Little Miss Sunshine lives in a backpack as well. She's a albino ferret. And I've seen rabbits, I've seen snakes, like all sorts of
I was going to
animals.
say
Yeah,
reptiles.
yeah,
Yeah, our family's about like
yeah.
reptiles.
So
Oh, okay.
it's portable. It goes
Wow.
with you.
Yeah,
So,
very
yes,
portable. Very
yes.
portable. And probably lots and lots of
Right, right.
protection if you show up
With
with
a
a
big old
snake,
snake, yeah.
right? Uh-huh.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so, um, in the process, tell me, so this is where your story began, right? And well, this is where your vision of your nonprofit began. What exactly does it provide?
Annie and Millie's Place is currently providing
Yes.
4 different programs, and then we have some plans to grow more growth. So currently, we host pop-up veterinary clinics with our partner, the Street Dog
Mm-hmm.
Coalition. So we provide all the logistics and the registration and the space. Working with faith communities, are huge partners. They love letting us use their parking lots for clinics. Those are free pop-up
Mm-hmm.
veterinary clinics for basic care, microchipping, nail chipping, vaccinations, all that stuff is for free. And then
Mm-hmm.
because there's always emergencies that never happen during office hours, there's also emergencies that never happen at clinics. And so we work with
Uh-huh.
area urgent and emergency veterinary clinics, and we cover the cost for animals that would need urgent or emergency
Wow.
care between those clinic
Wow.
times. So we're able to do that. We do a street outreach and have supplies, pet food and gear, leashes, collars, harnesses. In the cold weather, we have jackets and sweaters for animals. And we just do street outreach and can bring supplies. We work with some partnering organizations that have like pop-up food and hygienes and stuff like that. So we show up with the pet supplies there. And then our program
Mm-hmm.
director also just does direct street outreach. If somebody would call us and be like, hey, I need something, he'll just go meet them and bring them what they need. So veterinary care and supply outreach. We also are working with a couple of different organizations to connect people who need foster care for their animal while they're in either rehab or a hospital stint, and even a
Wow.
short-term jail sentence. We believe that
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
should be able to get your dog
Yes,
back. So,
absolutely. Amen.
so
I
that's
do
it,
too.
100%. So we
Yep.
work with a couple
Uh,
organizations who have a foster network, and then we are recruiting foster homes to add to their network, so that when we call them, like, I have a guy and a dog, and this is what the dog, you know, age, gender, the whole deal,
mhm.
and then we find appropriate fits for their animals for the people who need that.
Mhm.
And then those
Mhm.
reunification days are my favorite days when we get to bring the animal back to their
Oh,
person. Everybody is, it's just joy.
yeah.
It's just joy.
Yeah.
And then we also have an extreme weather hotel program. So when people are outside, when it's very, very cold or even very, very hot, and it's life threatening to be outside, we cover the cost. We coordinate the lift to get people into hotels, and then we cover the cost of hotel stays at pet friendly hotels in our community so that people would have a safe and secure place to
Mhm.
sleep in, in life threatening weather.
Mhm.
Someday, our big
Yeah.
goal is
You t
is create a co-shelter
Mhm.
space that people can have safe and secure overnight shelter with their animal alongside them every night. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah.
so that's Meatball telling me somebody's here.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome.
He's my doorkeeper.
Nice to meet him. That's
Right.
right.
Someone's at the
Someone's at
door.
the door.
Yes.
This is perfect. We couldn't have
Right.
scripted this better.
Right. Yes. Oh,
Um, when you talk about reunification and matching people with the needs that with churches and the resources that they need, I started to think about how our people and their animals, how do their relationships begin? What is the story there? Are these people who were housed and then and the animal was housed with them and they lost housing? Because we know nowadays that's, housing is expensive, very little affordable housing. This is happening in lots of cities,
right.
in lots of states. Um, or do they find each other out there?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, person, I got a need. Hey, you know,
Yep.
animal, I have a
Yep.
need. Let's hook up. Let's
Yeah.
satisfy that need together and move on. Is that where the
So
partnerships begin?
it's across the board. It really is. I mean, we do have some
Yeah.
people who became homeless and had their animal with them. We've had some people who
Mhm.
um, somebody had a litter of pups and gave one of the pups away, or one of the kitties or whatever. So they just sort of, I have found that people experiencing homelessness tend to create a community amongst themselves. And
Yeah.
so if somebody
Mhm.
has a dog and that dog gets pregnant, then, there's like litter sharing that happens.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Sometimes they do find each other and like, hey, we're both strays. We should hang out together. I
Mhm.
did know somebody who
Mhm.
found a litter behind a dumpster, behind a Chick-fil-A. So like they sort of find each other that way. So I think every story is out there,
Mhm.
and that's what's uh, part of the advocacy piece of it is that we might all have a story in our head about people experiencing homelessness should or should not have an animal companion, and then we realize, well, they have this one because, and this they have this one because, and this one because, and all of a sudden that should uh, becomes a really gray space, and we realize that every story is really unique, and we need to think bigger
Yeah.
about what we could be doing to accommodate all the different stories that
Mhm.
are out there, instead of just saying, no, you can't come in because you have an animal. Well, let's look at all the different reasons and how we got here and what we can do to increase engagement with more and more people along the way. So to answer your question, they
Mhm.
come from everywhere and with every story, and we try to do the best we can to meet the needs as they show up.
Mhm. What are some of your challenges with, especially when people come to you or and have those stories, those black and white stories, those narratives in
It's
their heads? How does that challenge
Sure.
your work?
So I
Hmm.
guess that's another doorkeeper thing too, because we stand between the client and the the people who can support the client, right? So it's like we've got our volunteers
Yes.
and people with resources, and our clients in need and the people without the resources, and our work is in between and connecting those dots. Some of the challenges
Hmm.
on the side of the people with the resources is that script that, well, if somebody can't take care of themselves, how can they take care of their animal? And what we have found is, and research will show you, that animal tends to be more well cared for than the person themselves. Um, I have somebody on my board of
Hmm.
directors, Leslie Irvine. She's a professor of sociology at CU here in Boulder. She specializes in animals and society and did a big research project and wrote a book called My
Hmm.
Dog Always Eats First. And in her research, she shows
Ah.
that people experiencing homelessness will feed their animal before they feed themselves. They'll get veterinary care for their animal before they'll go to the doctor for themselves. And so the animal becomes
Yeah.
an avenue of
Hmm.
access to be able to build relationships of trust with systems, because people are caring for
Mm.
their animal, and then through that can then find trusted relationships with medical providers or caseworkers to be able
Yes.
to care for themselves. So flipping the script
Hmm.
that these animals aren't being cared for is actually a myth. They're actually very well cared for. Their animals are with their person 24/7, getting more exercise and fresh air than my
Hmm.
dogs are. So, it's just,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
these
There
animals
is
are actually
that.
very well cared for. So, that's a
Mm-hmm.
challenge. Is to break through that stigma around people experiencing
Mm-hmm.
homelessness with pets. The challenge on the side of the client is really just that we don't have enough resources to meet every need as big as it is. We try to always come up with something that we can do. Is if we can't do what they're asking, we're like, we
Yeah.
can't do that, but what we can do is this. So um,
Mm-hmm.
and even if that's, I can give you a big bag of dog food, or I can give you a carrier for your cat so you can take it with you, or whatever. We try to come up with what we can do. Some of our big challenge, I would say, our two biggest challenges are in having foster homes for the owned animal, because so many people love animals, like, oh, if I
Mm-hmm.
took an animal in, I'd have such a hard time giving it away. It's true, but you wouldn't say that to your grandchildren. You would give your grandchildren back to their parents, right? So, um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's the same thing. It's like you're holding somebody else's beloved fur baby, so to speak, they call them, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's somebody else's animal, and you get to give them back, even if you don't necessarily agree with how they're being parented. You have. give them back because it's
There
an
you go.
owned animal situation. And one of our foster parents, she's fostered through different organizations, not all through Annie Millie's. She's fostered a ton of animals. And I asked her once, I said, don't you have a hard time doing this and, giving these animals back? And she said, the truth is that if I kept every foster that I had, I would not have these relationships with the hundreds of animals that I've been able to have. So I can help more
Yeah.
and know more animals by giving them back all the time. So,
Hmm.
she's been able
Hmm.
to love more by letting go than she has by keeping them. So that's
Awesome.
where,
That is a lesson in itself
yes,
in life.
exactly,
That
exactly.
is a
It's a
life.
huge life
Yeah.
lesson for sure, for sure. So
Mhm.
just having enough
Mhm.
foster homes for the amount that is our most requested service
Mhm.
that we do, because not every foster home is a perfect fit for every animal that would come. Like I have an 80-year-old woman who fosters for us. She can't take the 2-year-old pit bull, but she can take the 9-year-old chihuahua,
Wow.
and they sit on her little chair and they watch Lifetime TV all day long. So it's perfect. and, and when I picked up, there was a little chihuahua that she had. And when I picked up that chihuahua and took her home, she was like, "You can come back to grandma's house anytime." And,
Oh,
so it was so good for them both. But, I have the
oh,
other, 2-year-old pit bull. I'm having a harder time finding a placement for because it's just a bigger dog
yeah.
that has more needs
Yeah,
and
he's
strong,
strong.
needs the walking and all that.
Yep.
And, isn't going to sit around
Mhm.
and watch Lifetime. So, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, oh. So it sounds to me like it's um a web of community engaging and and being in space with each other where they wouldn't
yeah,
normally be. So I'm not sure why our 80-year-old grandma wants to foster for Annie and Millie's place, but perhaps she would not have been in, I don't know her story, but I'm just imagining maybe she wouldn't have been in contact with people experiencing homelessness. Maybe that would have just been so outside of her sphere,
right,
right? But now I mean, and one of the most powerful things to break down barriers and walls and stereotypes and discrimination is to get to
right,
know
right.
somebody, right?
And
And so it's a
And
right.
that's a hard thing because we want to share the story with our foster parents so that they are comfortable
Hmm.
knowing the context that the animal is coming from. But we also need to protect the privacy of the
Hmm.
person whose animal we're
Yeah.
helping. And so the
Okay.
foster parent never meets the person.
Ah.
We keep that neutral also
Hmm.
because like we don't want that boundary. It's all about like
Hmm.
I've always said that boundaries are
Yes.
perforated lines and they're fluidly perforated lines, right? Because there's sometimes you need more engagement, sometimes you need a lot less, right? And
Yeah.
so we want to
Hmm.
protect our volunteer foster
Hmm.
parents at the same time providing access.
That's
So
right.
we become the go between, the doorkeeper between
I
these
can.
stories all the time. And we try to give as much information
Hmm.
without personal stuff. And same for the other way around. Like, where is my dog going? Your dog is going to a private home. There's no other animals in the home. They have a yard. There's a single lady
Hmm.
who's there, and she works from home, and she will just sit with your dog all day long. Or no, this is a dog
Okay.
that
Yeah.
has a large play area.
Hmm.
So it's always a crisscross between
Hmm.
how much information we can share, but knowing the story and then knowing the successes. Like, hey, that dog that you
Yeah.
just fostered, that person is now housed. How cool is that? You helped make that happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so the stories get shared, if
Mhm.
not the personal side of it, but they know that they're deeply connected to that
Yeah,
story's success.
exactly. Exactly. And it's a different way to be involved in the crises, the homelessness crises, is to really let's talk about um how they're finding comfort in the social, really it's dignity as well through these pets,
Yep.
right? And so like you said, Millie was Annie's yes, always a yes. And so you bring this story to the masses and the importance of it. So through Annie and Millie's place. Um, I'm curious, what kind of dog was Millie, and is Millie still alive?
So I'm not sure what kind of dog Millie was. I think she was some sort of, mutt. Looking at her, she's probably some sort of
Hmm.
healer, shepherd, mutt mix. She
Mm,
was cute. We have very few pictures of Millie that we can look at clearly. Um, And we
mm,
honestly don't know what happened to Millie when I received the death notification that Annie had died and that there was a dog at the scene. I was only given 24 hours to come get Millie, and I was
mhm,
halfway across the country. It was the middle of the night when I got the notification. There was too many logistics and honestly too much emotional trauma for me to figure that out in 24
sure.
hours. So I
Mhm,
released her to the detective who was handling the case, and I said, just do what it is
mhm.
you do. And I am hoping that, and I'm choosing to believe that what they do in
Yes,
those situations
yes.
is they take the animal by animal control to a local shelter. And then those dogs get adopted and find their forever homes where they sit around and watch Lifetime TV.
That's right.
So, so I am hoping that is the case for Millie, and I'm just
Uh,
going to choose to believe that that is so.
yeah. So before there was the organization of Annie and Millie's Place, you were uh,
I
a youth
was.
leader
Yes.
in the church for many, many, many
Yeah,
decades.
yeah.
Not that many
27
decades, but
years of
at least.
professional Christian
Yeah,
leadership
right.
and,
Okay.
yeah, faith formation, youth
Yeah.
ministry. Yeah. Mhm.
Hmm. And during that time, you were responsible for the formation, the faith formation, Christian faith formation of youth. And sometimes that called for you to, um, well,
Mhm.
to preach and to also to interpret the gospel for these youth. And something we talked about earlier on our phone call was that that got to be, there was some um, like cognitive dissidence with that, like what you were preaching and what you were teaching and asking the children to profess. Something else was going on because of what was happening in your family.
I
You want to
sure
talk
do.
about that?
Yes. So yes, I was a
Mhm,
professional Christian, Christian public leader for 27 years in youth ministry, faith formation, in ELCA congregations. And I loved every minute of it. It was fantastic. It was and I did it. I was a deaconess, did my ministry, diaconal ministry through
mhm,
the LDA. I had a deaconess who was my youth leader growing up, Karen Bakewitz, shout out. So she really formed that early identity for me. And that early
mhm,
identity, then I matured over time through, I went to seminary, got a master's degree, and then was continued in the youth ministry uh, world, to the niche of the life of the church. And as I was nearing the end of that career, I realized that something else was going on that was bigger than this. I don't want to say it wasn't a box, but this framework that I was in, um, that I learned every corner of it, and I was deeply embedded in the theology, and I was deeply
mhm,
embedded in the life of the church. I was national level leader, a synodical leader, local leader, and um, and my own, what was happening in my own family with Annie and Millie, navigating, setting
mhm,
boundaries, and the church, be a church of welcome, and in
mhm,
family, no way, and that doorkeeper, like in out in out in out, and then specifically, I remember when there was one Sunday I preached. At least quarterly, sometimes more, depending on the schedule. And the text was,
mhm,
when Jesus says, "As you've done for the least of these, you've done for me." Visit me in prison, give me, the shirt off your back, the glass of water, all those things. As you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. And my sister at that point was experiencing homelessness, And I was saying no to her
Mm.
every time she called.
Yeah.
And I could
Ah.
not get in that pulpit and tell other people to do what
Mm.
I could not do in my own life for my own
Mhm.
sister. And yes, there's
Mhm.
lots of things to unpack there because it's not an either or. There's,
Yeah.
well, given family systems, given historical context, given parable, given metaphor, given all those things, it's a whole nother podcast, right? But
Yeah.
for me in that
Yeah.
moment,
Mhm.
this framework um, got too tight
Mhm.
and got too small. And
Yeah.
I had a big problem uh, with my own integrity. And because I believed
Mm.
so much that, yes, we need to do these things, and yet so much that sometimes we can't. And the clash of
Mhm.
those two things spiritually, plus just being exhausted from 27 years of youth ministry, right? Like,
Yeah.
I was not going to
Yeah.
sleep on one more church floor and do
Honestly.
one more lock in. Just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Like, love those kids. My back does not, Um,
Right.
so like I said, great opportunities, but I was tired and I was ready for something new, and um, I needed to think about things. And so Annie died in the summer of 2019, July of 2019. And I
Mhm.
was at that point in time leading my congregation through pastoral transition. And so there was a whole
Mm.
bunch of stuff going on in congregational transitions and a whole bunch of stuff going on in my family system and a whole bunch of stuff going on inside my own head. And March 1st
Mhm.
of 2020, I sent that letter and said, I am retiring. Now that we have a new pastor had come in by then, it's time for that pastor to
Yeah.
create their next era of ministry for that congregation. And I need to make space for that. I don't have
Mhm.
another era in me. So I am creating the space for the next person to come in, and I am leaving. And 2 weeks later, the world shut down with COVID. And I was like, peace out, have fun. Like, like good luck
Good
with
luck
that.
with that.
And I did hang in with the congregation for a few months trying to figure out how we did that, which is a whole nother thing. But
Yeah.
then when I closed up my time at that church, I sat in my yard and I really started to think about, okay, what has the church done for me? What have I learned?
Mhm.
What do I know? And what do I still need to discover?
Mhm.
And I liken it to being like a prairie dog in the
Mhm.
ELCA. I knew all of the underground channels. I knew where to go and how to get to what side of the street underground and all the things. And then all of a sudden, when I stepped out of that place, I popped my head up and could look around and was like, oh, there's so much more out here. There's so much more that's happening. There's so much more
Mhm.
that I'm now free because I took my consecration vows very seriously. That when in
Yeah.
1993, May 23rd, 1993, I vowed to preach and teach the Lutheran doctrine. And that is what I did.
Mhm.
And when that Lutheran doctrine
Mhm.
couldn't help me figure it out anymore, I knew I needed to go learn something different.
Mhm.
And isn't that what,
Yeah.
like, well, getting back to like the early identity that Karen Bakewitz helped me identify, when I realized at that moment when I was sitting in my yard thinking like, oh my gosh, there's so much more. I realized at that point that over all of that time in the church, my
Mhm.
identity, my purpose, and my spirituality were 100% wrapped up in my job. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden I
Yeah.
didn't have that job anymore. So then I needed to figure
Mhm.
out who I was, why I was here, and what I actually believed
Mhm.
at that point. And then being
Yeah.
able to then read stuff that wasn't Lutheran doctrine and explore things
Mhm.
without feeling like a heretic or without feeling like I was
Yes.
um, screwing up in my vows, or that I wasn't, being a terrible
Mhm.
person or having no integrity.
Holding us.
Um,
Yeah.
it was really freeing to be
Mhm.
able to do that. And I think you and I talked about the fact, like, then the church did its job, because if the church and the community
Yes.
are helping us to think deeply
Amen.
and critically about who we
Amen.
are, what we believe, and what our purpose
Yes.
is, then all of that did its job, because I thought critically enough to be free from
Mhm.
one particular structure to
Yes.
be able to embrace a whole bunch of different things that I'm still exploring. And I've got this
Ah.
crazy myth. People say, "Well, how do you identify your spirituality now?" And I like to say that I'm sort of a universalist mystic, grounded
Mhm.
in the ancient
Mhm.
traditions of the original Jesus followers. So it's like this, like,
Yes.
figure that one out,
When you start in your church.
right? Right. It'll be fun once I figure out like what we're doing.
Okay. Let me
So,
know.
because it's sort of like this big freedom of being untethered, yet knowing you're totally safe.
Yeah.
So, and the
Yeah.
way that I have experienced God showing up through the work of Annie and
Mm,
Millie's, I really can't explain. And
mm,
even with 27 years of professional Christian public leadership and a master's degree in theology, I don't know. I just tell people, hey, this really weird thing happened to me the other day, and I'm pretty sure it was not of this world. And I'm 100% convinced that I saw God that day.
it was
So I
God.
have,
Yes.
no words to really explain some of the things and some of the stories. And I just rest and be like, okay,
Mhm.
it's all bigger. It's all bigger. And I can be okay with that.
Yeah.
And it's been really kind of fun
Mhm.
and freeing. And to be doing it for myself, because I got really, really good at using a Lutheran framework and theology for helping young people figure out, like, to navigate through
Mhm.
life with these handholds that I think are really important. The rituals and the faith practices
Yeah.
become really important as you're navigating through major milestones in life, and that's great. And in doing that
Mhm.
for other people, I sort of lost myself. So
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
being launched out of the church because the church did
Yeah.
its job, I'm now finding who I am
Yes.
again, and it's really something
Yeah.
cool and fun. So
It's pretty radical, and I believe that the church, we're talking about how the church did its job because it taught you to be, a reformer.
there you go. Yeah,
Right? And to question Lutheran
right.
theology, right? And to
Right.
question. Um, but also I can see some failures in in that in your story, and some of that being that as leaders, number one, we're often overworked. Number two, we feel like even as we're transforming, that we have to continue to rotely um,
Hmm.
preach what it is that we all signed up to say, right? And that we can't be authentic with one another, with our congregations, with the youth that we've been entrusted with, that we can't say. It's very difficult to say, I am
Right.
undergoing something,
Right.
right? Something is happening within me, and we're here together. Um, Perhaps let's talk about, is there space in our Lutheran theology for this kind of experience, right? There was no room for
Yeah.
you basically what you've told me to be able to do
Well,
that. So I see that as a
well, it's
failing
I
in
think only
some
for
ways.
leaders, though, because here's the thing, because
Yes.
the
Yes.
church was very invitive. And I actually led a group of 12, it was a small group of 12 people. We didn't put on the church calendar because it was sort
Hmm.
of an invite only, because it needed to be a safe space. But I knew that I had collected these people
Yeah.
together. There were 5 generations represented within the 12 people, and we called ourselves the heretics. And
Hmm.
we read like stuff that was like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, that the conservative members of the congregation would like freak out about, and and we talked about it, and it
Uh-huh.
was really good. But for the leader,
Mhm.
we become like the anchor
Yes.
points that everybody is
Yes.
looking at from all the different
To
perspectives,
pull you back
right? And
in,
so to
right.
be the
Yes. Yes.
anchor
So we have to pull you back
to be the
in.
anchor,
Yeah.
we need to be
Hmm.
firmly grounded and firmly like buried in that
Yeah.
sand to allow the ship to move, right? And then what happens when we're
Right.
not?
Yep.
So even if the church
Yeah.
and the people are allowed to move
Mhm.
as leaders, it's really hard to
Mhm.
maintain that anchor
Yeah.
space.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's exactly what I'm hearing in your story as well. Um, and so you talk about, you were well trained and well educated. and that
Mhm.
Lutheran theology. And I can just see the glow on your face as you learn and just get exposed to God in different settings,
Right.
right? And I'm with you. I believe that God is outside of our Lutheran box as well. So, um, but with your with your training and formation with
Mhm.
the LDA, okay, where you made those vows to preach and teach the Lutheran doctrine, um, what I mean, where does that fit in your life? Is that something that you don't look toward anymore? Is it something that where is that now in your story, in your faith
Yeah, I think
story?
it's still very much part of me. I was the first. I believe I was the first to get the pin, the Cairo pin, the deaconess pin tattooed, and so I still have my
Oh,
tattoo.
oh,
And,
okay.
it's still there. I'm not going to cover it up or anything.
That's
You know,
that's
um,
no, that's why youth be
right,
careful what you get
right,
tattooed on your
right,
skin.
right. It's so funny. But,
Yeah.
and I have to quote the words of my son because he's heavily tattooed now, and he has a Lutheran rose
Mhm.
on his shoulder. And I remember asking him, like, why did you do that? You don't even go to church anymore, boy. What are you doing? And he was like, Mom, this is the faith that shaped me. And I was like, I'm like, okay, that's awesome,
No
you know. And
kidding.
then so I look back to my, my deaconess tattoo. I was like, this is the community that shaped me, as I was growing and just starting to launch into life and into the world. And Karen had DK
Mhm.
had taken me under her wing when I was a child and grew me up, and then gave me to the community, and the community grew me up. And there's actually one story from the uh, Cleveland area conference of 1995. I was serving at a church
Mm,
in Louisville, Kentucky at the time, St. John Lutheran. My pastor had gone on vacation, and this is
mhm.
pre cell phones. So, like, there's no
Okay,
contact. Like,
okay.
he went on vacation, he went on vacation.
No, come on.
And during those 2 weeks that he was on vacation was the annual meeting. And so I drove up to Cleveland,
Mm,
and by random fluke chance, a situation had happened in my town, Louisville, where
mhm,
a gentleman was well, he was taking his baby, his 6-month-old baby, to work, but he had taken a couple of days off work, and so he's totally out of routine, whatever, and went to work, and the baby never got dropped off at daycare, and instead she sat in that back seat of
mm,
the hot car and she died. And so this hits
mhm.
the news. It's a big major deal, of course.
Yeah.
And he's a member of my congregation. And so all of a sudden, I'm up in Cleveland.
Mm,
My roommate is back at our apartment in Louisville, and the phone is ringing off the hook because they need to they need their pastor to help navigate this, but he was out of town, so find me. And so
mhm,
weird series of events. God's at work. Um, I
mhm,
had called I had called my husband from the payphone, my now husband, who was then my boyfriend, my fiance at that time, from a
mhm,
payphone that was in the lobby.
mhm,
And so when my roommate was getting all these calls, she called my Rob, and Rob was like, well, she just called me from a payphone. Here's that number. So my roommate randomly called a payphone, and somebody was walking by who knew me and answered the phone, answered like random
yeah.
payphone. Let's answer it, right?
Oh my
And
gosh.
she was like, I'm just randomly looking for, Kristen Bruner. That was my name at the time. And they're like, I know her. I'll go find her and tell her to call you. And then I went and I got this news that this tragic story had just happened. I'm 25 years old. I have no idea what I'm
Yeah.
doing. Right. And so I got
Mm,
the story. I'm like, I
yeah.
know I have to go back there, but I don't know how to do this. And so I remember going around
Yeah.
the dorm where everybody was hanging out and having fun. And I can't remember, and forgive me, people who are out there. I remember sitting at the table, but I don't
Yeah.
remember all the names. But I pulled somebody who I knew was a social worker. I
Yeah.
pulled somebody who I knew was a hospice chaplain. I knew somebody who was an attorney. I knew somebody um, it walked that world. And I remember pulling 5 women with very different
Mm,
professional experiences. And I said, I need your help. And we sat down at the table, and I told them the story, and I said, what do I need to know? What do I need to expect? how do I navigate this? Like all of the things. And we talked for an
Mhm.
hour, and then they prayed for me. And then the next morning, I got
Oh,
up and I got in my little car and I drove back and led our church through this tragic story. And did my
yeah.
very first funeral was for the 6-month-old baby who had passed. And
Oh.
um, figured that out. And then I remember when my pastor came back from vacation, I was in the office waiting for him, and he comes in. He's all like, "Hey, how'd things go?" And I'm like, "Oh
He's all
no!" I'm like,
tan.
"You're gonna sit your butt down because we got some talking to do." And I was like, "This is how this goes." And he was just like, you would watch the blood drain from his face. And I was like, "But I got it, and I've been equipped."
Yeah,
Like I've been equipped by the community that
that
things
amen.
that framed and or formed and supported me as I grew in
Yeah.
that space. And that networking still happens in my work today. Like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm,
I like never wanted to start a nonprofit. I was hanging out with like young people and families, like serving the lunch at the
yep.
homeless center, but not like navigating homelessness. The human animal bond,
Mhm.
access to veterinary care, that's a whole thing. Like all of this stuff, I had no idea what I'm doing. So what am I doing now? I'm gathering those people and saying, what do I need to do? And it's the
Mhm.
LDA
Mhm.
community, the LDC, LDA that taught me
Yeah,
how to network
that's a
and
yeah.
how to do it.
And that's what I was gonna say, now that community is expanded to the
Yes,
CLD,
yes,
right? So now we
yes,
even have
yes,
deacons, right? To help us navigate and to, equip us.
yes,
That's what they did. You gathered 5 deaconesses in a room, and the testimony that you're giving today also, I hope that our listeners understand in your story, is that that was just a slither of who the
right,
LDA
right.
is. Like, you were able to find an attorney, a
Right.
social
A
worker.
chaplain. Yeah.
In 1995, a chaplain,
Yeah.
probably a
Yeah.
pastor,
Yeah.
right? ELCA, probably a pastor, all within that community that could really say, "Okay, here we go. We're filling you up with this, and we're gonna pray for you after we give you all the professional stuff, and we're gonna send you off." And that's empowering. So, that's what community looks like. A lot of people ask, well, what is community? Why would I need it? They sense that they might need it. Um, and so that's the kind of um, illustration that I think really shows what the LDA and the CLD is. Well, the LDA and
Yeah.
in its
Yeah.
2 communities. Um, and uh, but and also your story of transformation is also what the LDA is, and its 2 communities. You are not alone in this. And as we grow, because as you know, we do not belong to any one church body, we're autonomous. And so it's a place that has room for people to breathe out, expand, and breathe back in, breathe in and out. And you still remain loved. You still remain, um, yeah, who you are and a part of us. And we're all very
Okay.
proud of you. I have been wanting to do this interview with
Thank
you for
you.
a long time when I found out about your organization, having done some work with people who've experienced homelessness as well. And it is super, super inspiring. And you are a representation of that community.
Thank
So
you.
thank
I
you.
appreciate your
Thank you
support.
so much.
Yeah. This has been a fun
Mm.
conversation, and it's fun to think about. There's a Dr. Seuss book, All the Places You'll Go. Like it's fun to think about all the places you've been, and how they all, intertwine and
Uh-huh.
dance through the story together. So thank you for
Mhm.
giving me a chance to do this. It's fun to do it. Thank you.